Hey folks, I'm Dennis. I'm going to make a cutting board for my mom today. I've got some cherry, some hard maple, and some walnut, and I'm going to put all this together and show you how to make a cutting board. Let's get started. These boards that I have run from 36 to 40 inches long. So the cutting board I'm going to make is going to end up being about 12 inches wide and probably 16 inches long. So I'm going to cut these in half to 18 inches and start from there. Next, I'm going to set my table saw to rip these pieces into 1.5 inch strips. That'll end up being the width of the strips within the cutting board. Okay, so I got the cherry, the walnut, and the maple all ripped to 1.5 inches. I want to create a pattern with all the 1.5 inch faces glued up together. So I'm just going to kind of randomize this. The key is you don't want this part here to be any wider than your planer, because it's good to run this through the planer after it's all glued up. So my planer's 12, it'll take 12.5. I'm really looking for about an 11.5 inch cutting board, and this is 11 3/4, so that'll be fine. So I'll put some clear packing tape down on my clamps so I don't get glue stuck to them. Flip each piece on its side, and then I'll glue each one of these up, put them in the clamps, and let them sit overnight. And what you want to do is you want to make sure you've got really good coverage this part of the glue up. Well, really with all parts with a cutting board. You want to make sure you've got really good coverage. Because the starved joint's going to let your board split. Even up the ends. Then you want to take a damp rag or a sponge or something and try to get off the bulk of this glue. Some people will let it dry and scrape it off later. That's fine too, just depends on what you like to do. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this slab, now that it's all glued up, I'll let it set up overnight. And I'm going to run it through the planer both sides just to smooth everything out. I've taken my crosscut sled and I've set up a stop at 1 3/8 inches. The width of the strips that I cut off here will determine the thickness of the finished cutting board. I chose 1 3/8. To me, 1 1/4 was just a little bit too thin, and 1 1/2 was a little too thick. So now it's all cut up. So of course these will be the glue surfaces now. That's why we planed them, so they'll be nice and smooth. But for purposes of seeing how it's going to look and getting the pattern correct, you want to flip them all up so the end grain is showing rather than the edge grain. And then you want to take every other piece and flip it over to alternate the pattern. And so then when it's all done, that's about how it'll look. So now what we're going to do is flip them back over because I've got to glue up the sides. Take a couple straight boards and line it up just as well as I can to eliminate as much trimming. Then I'll take a damp sponge and wipe off as much of this glue as I can anyway. You're not going to get it all off, and like I say, I'm going to sand it anyway, so it'll be fine, but it's nice to get some of it off. I can take my belt sander and I'm going to sand this down smooth. It'll be kind of the first sanding. Alright, so that's got both sides pretty smooth. That's 120 grit. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just trim off all four edges because there's a little bit of variation from the glue up. Now I'm going to put a chamfer around the edges. I've got a chamfer bit with a guide bearing in my router, and so I'm just going to take the board across the router and chamfer all these corners, and then I'm going to save the vertical ones for last because they're the most likely that are going to chip out. So if they do chip out, I can hit them last. So next what I'll do is I'll get the random orbital out and I'll sand both sides with 180 and then 220 and then 320. My plan is, now that this is all sanded, I'm going to finish it with walrus oil, cutting board oil. It's FDA, food safe, the whole bit, and then I'm going to probably put a couple of coats on that. I'll put one on, let it soak in kind of overnight, come back tomorrow night, put another coat on, let that set in, and then I'm going to wax it with walrus oil wood wax. Same thing, it's just got some beeswax added to it, and that'll seal it real well. Keep it from accumulating bacteria and keep the finish looking nice.